Welcome to the Will to Power podcast. I am your host, Nick Vital. Before we get started, make sure to hit the subscribe button, like, and share with your friends. Really helps me get new subscribers, helps me in the algorithm, etc., etc. Let's begin. So today, the topic is what to do when you're a student and how to counter the left in the classroom. Now, I think this is a hugely important topic for a few different reasons. Firstly, universities, educations, these are kind of factories of culture. This is where people get their worldview. It's where people get their value system. So whenever you have these institutions that are wholly dominated by the left, well, you end up with a very left-wing, dysgenic society, as we see. So it's very important as part of a general strategy to take these institutions over, right? What's that saying? There is no political solution. We're not going to vote our way ourselves out of this problem. Well, that's true. That's 100% true. But that doesn't necessarily mean the only alternative is to hunker down into a prepper compound or something like that, prepare for the race riots, whatnot. Instead, we need to be having a proactive strategy. And this is part of that proactive strategy. Now I'm going to backtrack a little bit, and let's talk about the left, and let's talk about what they do. Now, the left has basically done this over the last nearly 100 years, right? They've insinuated themselves into institutions, slowly taken them over, and then once they have hegemony in those institutions, well, then it's just left-wing nonsense all the time. So recognizing that strategy has been used by the left and it has been effective, how can we do something similar? How can we have our own long march through the institutions? How can we take over the lower bodies of power? Things like civic organizations, church boards, school boards, or even just the tone and the direction of discourse in a classroom. And that's what this is about. And the second reason why this is very important is because so many of the listeners are student-aged, right? There's going to be a lot of people listening to this. A lot of people in the new right are very young. So, and there's not a lot of direction given to them, unfortunately, right? It's just like, read this book sort of thing. Watch this 2-minute video, like that's a bunch of edits. Watch a Keith Woods video, something like that. Here's a stack of research about genotypes and shit like that, haplogroups. But there's not a lot of discussion about strategy and what to do and how to do it effectively. So this is kind of what this is aiming towards. So you're a student, you're on the right, you're surrounded by all this pause nonsense, you want to make a change, you want to make the world less fucked. What can you do? Well, one thing you can do is start to combat the left in the classroom. So before we get all into the hows, it's important to note that there are a few prerequisites to make this work. First of all, this is geared towards humanities, right? If you're in a STEM class or a nursing program and somebody brings up some pause bullshit, I don't know how you counter that. This is geared towards people who are in classes where you're naturally given a license to discuss topics of political significance. So things like poli-sci, sociology, ethics, those sorts of things. The next thing also this works especially well for online classes since you have time to articulate thoughts in well-written format, but it's also applicable to in-class learning. The next thing that's important to make this work is to be intelligent, to write well. That's hugely important. A lot of this contingents on you presenting yourself as a reliable authority and the teacher liking you for being smart. So if you can't pull that off, then this might not work for you. I don't know what to tell you. And I imagine, this is a right-wing audience. Sorry to tell you, but a lot of you people are fucking retarded. So maybe 50% of people this will work for. That's the next thing that's really important. The last kind of prerequisite is to not piss off your teacher too much, to not challenge them too much. So there's a couple things here. First, teachers have egos like everybody else. They don't like being challenged on the face of it. Secondly, in order to teach effectively, they need to kind of maintain a degree of prestige, respect, and power over the class. If you fuck that up, then even if they like what you're saying, they're still going to be pissed off about that. So be very, very careful about directly challenging your teacher or personally attacking your teacher or anything of that nature. This is a guide of how to combat the left and still get good grades. So keep that in mind. So again, very important. Geared towards humanities. Hopefully you're intelligent. Don't piss off your teacher too much. You'll be fine. And next, while doing this, it's very, very important to have clear goals in mind. You don't necessarily want to be doing things because they feel good or because they amuse you. Not necessarily the best way to go through life. So you need clear goals, reasons for why you're doing things. But before we can even get into that, we need to talk about something else that's really important. And that is a basic kind of understanding of who's who, right? You need to know who is the enemy, who is the middle force. And I don't necessarily mean like these people are evil or anything like that, but they're espousing very fucked up ideas. And the reason you need to make this delineation is because you're going to treat them differently, right? The people who are the enemies, you're going to neutralize them. Enemies are people that you cannot win over, you can only neutralize. People in the middle, you can win over. It's very simple. Or at least you can give them room to be normal themselves and not be intimidated by the far left. And that's what a lot of this is about. So, as part of the clear goals, you need to understand that not everyone is your enemy. You're not in this alone. You need to be able to identify the worst offenders, right? The people espousing the craziest bullshit left-wing nonsense. And that's who you need to isolate and neutralize, while understanding that the other people, even though you might not agree with them entirely, and even though they might have some paused ideas, you need to tread lightly so that you can give them room to move right without you pushing them to the left. So very, very important there. So that's the two big goals. Combating the hegemony of the left-wing discourse in these settings, by neutralizing the people who are espousing them and neutralizing those ideas while winning over the middle forces. Now, one of the ways you're going to do this is simply by keeping the left on the defensive, right? You're going to be forcing them to justify and explain their beliefs while you're going to be speaking in a very matter-of-fact sort of way. And this is, anytime you're explaining yourself to somebody, you're losing points, right? You're kind of positioning yourself lower than them. You're making it seem like you're trying to sell them on something. So you don't ever want to have to explain yourself too much, but you want to make your enemies, the people on the left, justify and explain their beliefs to an extreme degree. And again, you want to be able to do it in a way that also you want to be able to pick out their worst ideas and highlight those. And again, in relation to the middle ground, a big part of what you're doing is by neutralizing the far, far left, you're giving the middle ground room to kind of just be fucking normal, right? They don't have to feel pressured to conform to these fucking crazy ideas that, these people are vehemently asserting as if they're true. Instead, you're counterposing different ideas, and you're providing room for people to operate in between that more comfortably. So this is something that's much appreciated by those people in the middle as well. And then along with that, you are essentially denying the ability of the left to kind of define consensus, and you're denying the ability of the left to steer discourse unabated. Because essentially that's what happens in these settings, right? It's like you get the crazy left-wing people, and you might get like one Christian conservative or something like that who's going to argue something really fucking retarded like tradconism. And it's just going to fall flat. Maybe hopefully they're articulate. If they're articulate, it might work out okay. But generally what's going to happen is you're just going to have this total domination by the left. And anybody somewhere in the middle is just going to feel pressured to conform to that. And if you can provide a counterbalance, and I'm not saying you have to be, thrown up fucking Roman salutes or something like that, but if you can present alternative ideas and challenge the worst ideas of the left, then you're going to give the people in the middle, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be shifting the Overton window, essentially. And that's what a lot of this is about. So let's talk about how you're going to do this. So a huge part of this is indirectness. And I stress this all the time. And if you've ever had the displeasure of me trying to debate you, then you'll notice that I very rarely throw out very solid positions myself. I almost never this is what I think, because that's retarded, because then you just give somebody to argue against. Instead, you want to be picking at other people. So one thing you're going to do is be very indirect. And this serves you in a number of ways. First of all, you're not going to be creating personal conflicts, right? Because that's not going to help things necessarily. Creating personal enmity where it doesn't need to exist, and personal tension, that's not necessarily going to win people over to your side. But whenever you can attack ideas without necessarily attacking the people who espouse them, and if you can preemptively kind of attack those ideas, then that's much more powerful than somebody says something and you directly challenge it. So that's one part of indirectness. Another part of indirectness, and this is something the left does a lot as well, and this is playing with language, right? You want to be defining words yourself. Or you need to be closely examining the way that other people define words. And this is something the left does skillfully, is they lie all the time by playing with language. It's just their MO, right? And you got to fight fire with fire, right? And you have to be able to do this. This is kind of common sense, right? It's kind of like stating things in a way that makes it more likely that you'll influence people to do the things you want to, right? This, Aristotle wrote a book called Rhetoric, 2,000 fucking years ago. And, it's kind of sprouted into a whole industry of marketing since then. But you need to be doing the same thing. You need to be playing with language and defining things in a way that serves you, that serves your ideas. Absolutely key. Another kind of indirect method is the foot in the door technique. And this is where you begin with premises and begin with kind of ideas that people will naturally agree with. Keep that in mind. Another method of indirectness is arguing through allegories. I would say this is insanely important too, because this is just a demonstration of high IQ as well. Intelligent people can think figuratively and allegorically. They don't always have to think literally. And when you can use this, you can present a lot of ideas that are extremely far right, but you can present them in a way that doesn't appear as far right. So, for example, you can use China or Confucianism as a stand-in for something like National Socialism or fascism. You know, if you're talking about how the government should function, or what the government's relationship should be towards media, you can use China as an example rather than, you know, fascist Italy. Or you can use Confucianism as an example of an ethical system that is extremely based in right wing, but is going to be able to fly under the radar rather than just being like, well, traditional Western values or something like that. So allegories, hugely important. Likewise, analogies. So parallel situations that, analogies are always imperfect. There's no such thing as like perfect analogy, so they're always kind of a rhetorical device. One I use a lot is, and I think this probably doesn't sway too many people on the left, but, again, the point is to sway people in the middle. But using the analogy of, why, if you're against the wall, then why do you have doors on your house? Why do you leave your doors? Why don't you leave your doors unlocked? You obviously don't want people to come in on their own. How is that different for our country? So that's an analogy. Is using very basic examples that people can understand on a practical level and then applying them to a wider issue. The next is repackaging. So again, this is very similar to allegories, but repackaging ideas with different names. I don't understand the fixation with people on like edginess. I'm gonna like do the thing that alienates the most people, but it's a good idea to call things to repackage things in a way that won't alienate people in the middle, or at least something that sounds appealing to them. So something like the Bhagavad Gita, the fucking Hindu book, again, extremely based. But this is a way to repackage some of those based ideas, things like fulfilling duty, equanimity in the face of suffering, things of that nature. Those kind of based ideas, but repackaging in a way where people are like, oh yeah, Buddhism, Hinduism, cool. It kind of flies under that radar again. So that's indirectness. And again, the left is extremely indirect. They lie and play with language all the time. You gotta fight fire with fire. The next method of countering the left that you're going to utilize in such a class is to start off slow. And specifically how you're going to start off is by establishing authority early on. So in the first assignment or two, you're going to come across as very non-threatening. You're not going to, push people too much. Maybe you'll ask a few like Socratic questioning, things like that. But right out the gate in the beginning of the class, you simply want to look smart. And this is going to establish you as an authority. It's going to create a halo effect around you where anything you say thereafter is going to carry more weight and people are going to consider it more. So again, right out the gate, appear smart, just write the normie response extremely well. Maybe include additional information. That's another way that you can add to your authority, is if you're the one introducing new concepts and info, right? It's not necessarily the teacher. So, for example, if you're in a, we'll just say a Ethics 101 class, and part of it is, you learn about Kant and Mills and Confucius and Aristotle, but you're the one to bring up Apollonian versus Dionysian, that whole concept. Or you're the one to bring up, Hinduism and the kind of Hindu notion of duty, then all of a sudden you look extremely, your breadth of knowledge makes people pay attention to you and makes people take what you say with a little bit more consideration. So again, that's how you're going to act right in the beginning, is to simply establish authority early on. So now I'm going to talk about kind of how to shield yourself from potential repercussions. The best way that I know to shield yourself from potential repercussions. And whenever I'm talking about this, I think a lot of this is contingent, right? Because we're talking about, in a classroom setting, we're talking about combating the hegemony of the left. So it's very different than if the right has hegemony. So when you have hegemony in an institution, you can operate a lot differently than if you are the one challenging the hegemony, challenging the power. So this is kind of geared towards people who are kind of fighting that uphill battle, who are kind of beleaguered, who are, the lone based one in their class, or one of the few. And how can they best operate in that situation when they're, have less power? And one of the ways they can shield themselves from a blowback, at least as a student, right? You can't do this as much as a teacher, unfortunately, but is what you can do as a student, especially if you are already coming across as intelligent, is simply pretending to be eccentric and thinking, right? None of this is serious. Nothing you're saying is serious. If you advocate for total state control over media, that's not serious. It's just you playing a thought experiment. So by doing this and by presenting multiple, sometimes contrasting views in different assignments, obviously in a single essay, it generally has to be logical and consistent. But if throughout the course you're pretty obviously, at least to the professor, providing different angles, you're actually arguing for different things throughout the semester, then if you do say something that pisses off a lot of people or that crosses some sort of line, well, you can say, well, this was me exploring an idea. I do this all the time. I've written from multiple perspectives. So you can be a little bit elusive that way. You can be a little bit opaque that way. Like I've already mentioned, you probably don't want to wear your politics on your sleeve necessarily. It's much more easy to challenge ideas than it is to defend them. Keep that in mind. The next thing is I would be pretty careful with satire just because it can be taken the wrong way. It's really hard to write good satire. And if you don't care as much about your grade or pissing off the professor, then it can go well, I guess. It's one of those things where if you're really stand out in the class, you can do just about anything, right? If you've seen it before. You've seen like the fucking teacher's pet. The teacher just loves them and they can fucking do anything. Same way, if you write really well, then you can get away with writing a lot of crazy shit. And a lot of times if you present a satire, you can get away with it even more. But again, be careful. Insofar as you do present extreme ideas, be very nonchalant. Have a very nonchalant response to any criticism, right? Don't apologize. Don't exacerbate it. Don't escalate it. But don't explain yourself overly. Don't justify yourself overly. Don't apologize. Just be very nonchalant about it. It's kind of like the concept of a shit test in PUA, right? Pickup. If you say something, a girl challenges you and said, you say something like, I'm not going to think of an example right now, but you say something, the girl doesn't like it or acts like she doesn't like it, so she challenges it, and she's seeing how you respond. If you apologize, if you explain yourself, you fail. If you say, yeah, what of it? Or, of course, I'm like that. What did you think? Some bullshit like that. If you ignore or escalate, or, escalate in terms of like joking around and, taking it to the next level, then you pass. And it's the same way in this. If people get upset and you get upset with them, well, you fail. If people get upset and you start justifying and apologizing, you look weak. If people get upset and you shrug your shoulders, smile and sit the fuck down, don't say anything, don't even acknowledge it, well, you got the power, right? You're in their head. That's how you want it to be. So keep that in mind. Now, as we wrap up, I want to talk about exactly what you can expect if you do this. Now, I'm not saying this is like a magical method. I'm not saying this is going to change the United States overnight. But here's what's going to happen. Now, so whenever you first start the class, there will be a few students you notice who are kind of trending left, who kind of have that, it was kind of like gay mindset. They're kind of on the cusp. They're between the normie left and the fucking extremely gay left. And you'll have those people at the beginning of the semester, and they cut that shit out, right? Eventually they realize that this isn't one of those places where they're going to be universally praised for that shit, and they're going to stick to their normie left point of view. So they're just going to stay normie left. It's okay. There's going to be people on the far left. Now, the people on the far left, they're going to be more defensive, and they won't be able to go out on as many kind of really far left-wing political limbs. So they're going to have less room to espout really crazy shit. That's good. And then there's going to be people who are kind of in the normie left, who are just kind of, the middle forces, just the typical whatever American, who are going to start voicing more common sense ideas. And they're going to start, they're going to quit going along with the chorus as much. Most importantly, seeds will be planted. These ideas that you present, they might have the potential blossoming. Again, it's not like left-wing ideas just kind of were forced on people. This kind of developed, through cultural infiltration. And that's exactly what we need to do. Finally, the last thing you can expect, the last result, if you do this well, is a good grade. You can easily do this. You can easily espouse very unpopular ideas if you do it well and get A's. Not hard. Well, again, be intelligent. So finally, I just want to mention one more time that this is a method that is primarily used when you're struggling against power. It's to challenge power, not necessarily to seize it at the very end, not necessarily to exert power. There's always going to be stages of struggle. The stages of struggle are going to be based on the relative power discrepancy of different forces. Right now, the people on the right have very little power, especially in a place like a university. So we have to operate accordingly. We can't afford to necessarily be too out there and extreme. We have to be very smart in the way we operate. We have to have kind of like a David and Goliath approach in a way. Goliath was this huge giant, and what David do? He hit him with a fucking rock in the eye. Very indirect, right? Goliath wasn't expecting that. He expected a sword fight. So, same thing. We have an uphill battle. We're beleaguered. There's faggot leftists all around us. But there is hope. And most importantly, with strategy, with intelligent strategy, and not just fucking LARPing on the internet about being, forming an ethno-state or whatever, then we have a fucking chance. But again, we actually need methods, we need strategy, we need clear thinking, not just kind of ideology. So hopefully this helps you. If you are in university, please leave a comment or share this with other people that you know. And I'd love to hear back from you. Until next time, peace.